Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Pathfinder community event hosted by the Connected Places Catapult. My name is David Pounder, and I'm a systems engineer working in the Catapult in the Pathfinder delivery team. And I'm going to be taking you through the agenda today and facilitating the Q&A sessions. So this is going to be the third Community Day event that we're running as a webinar. So hopefully we've got the hang of it by now. And with any luck, we'll be able to see some of you in person for some of the next sessions to meet some of you guys and network properly. So in the meantime, everything's been recorded on this webinar, including the questions and answer sessions. So you can watch it back later or share it with any colleagues who might be interested. It's going to be available on the Connected Places Catapult website after the event, and we'll send the link around to all attendees after the event. So we've got some brilliant content lined up for you today, both from the Pathfinder Steering Committee and the industry speakers. So I'm going to quickly take you through that now. So first of all, we're going to hear from the Pathfinder Steering Committee until about 10:45. So we're going to have Fozia Chugtai from the DFT starting off with an update from the DFT's perspective. We've got Gordon Baker from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and he'll be talking about supporting R&D and business growth in robotics, including drones. We've then got a presentation from Howie from the Catapult, and he'll be talking about the Pathfinder 2020-2021. Finally, for the Pathfinder Steering Committee presentations, we've got Fozia again and Chris G from the Catapult, who will be talking about the Drone Pathfinder Catalyst program, and I think they'll explain a little bit about the differences between those two. So after those committee presentations, we're going to hold a short Q&A session until about 10:45. So please, as the guys are talking, put your questions in the chat, and I'll ask the panel to answer any questions once the Q&A session begins. The exception to that is any questions on the Pathfinder Catalyst program, because we've actually got a dedicated Q&A session for that at towards the end of the webinar. So please feel free to ask any questions on that, and we'll hold them until later. Okay, so after the steering committee presentations, we're going to move on to our industry presentations to really bring to life what's happening in this space. So there'll be 5 presentations, which will be up to 10 minutes each, and then there'll be 5 minutes immediately after each presentation for each presentation, for questions. So just to run through those quickly. Firstly, we'll be hearing from John Henderson from Trax International. And he'll be talking about the airspace integration of drones in support of COVID response. Then we'll hear from John McKenna at CSAI, talking about close visual inspection in industrial environments, particularly using BV loss. Then we'll be hearing from Jen Cook from NCA, supported by Phil Hansen during the questions, and they'll be talking about NCA's drone demonstration and development Pathfinder. Then we'll hear from Dave Pankhurst at BT, talking about unlocking BV loss to realise the future of drone technology. And finally, for the industry presentations, Chris G from the CPC, the Catapult, talking about the Open Access UTM project. So just a reminder, put your questions in the chat during each 10-minute slot, because the Q&A will be immediately after each of those industry presentations. So once we've wrapped up the industry presentations at around 12 o'clock, we're going to go to a dedicated Q&A panel session for the Drone Pathfinder Catalyst program, which will run until 12:40 or until everyone's run out of questions. And the panel will consist of Fozia from the DFT, Gordon, Andrew Chadwick from the Catapult, Chris G from the Catapult, Howie from the Catapult, and I'll be facilitating that again, asking the questions. So finally, we'll be wrapping up just shortly before or after 12:40, depending on how many questions we get. And yeah, we're really looking forward to it. So that's quite enough from me for now. And I'll hand over firstly to Fozia, who's going to open up from the DFT for the steering group presentations. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Fozia Chugtai from Department for Transport. Welcome to today's event. So just start off by giving a short update on from the department. So the department wants to ensure that drones are used safely and securely and that we provide the right platform to harness the wide-ranging opportunities and benefits that drones can bring. DFT, BAYS, and Civil Aviation Authority work closely together to identify possible regulatory and legislative change needed to support the commercialisation of new services. We want to make sure that we provide a framework for safe drone use to provide confidence in their appropriate use and allow the sector to grow. There are also risks from the deliberate and accidental misuse of drones, which can negatively impact public perception of the drone industry. While government supports the positive use of drones, it also has a responsibility to protect the safety of the public and take action to mitigate safety, security, and privacy. This programme of work complements the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Bill, which is going through the final stages of the Houses of Parliament at the moment. The bill will address gaps in law enforcement powers to counter drone misuse and other means of encouraging the safe use of drones. The requirements of the delegated and implementing regulations will also help to ensure that drones are used in a way that protects people's safety, security, and policy. Since the regulations came into force, the CAA have updated some of their guidance documents, especially CAP 722, to fully encompass the regulations, and the latest edition was published in December. The UAS airspace restrictions policy and guidance was also published in December, and they've also recently published Advanced Air Mobility, taking a use case approach, which shares thinking from the CAA Innovation Hub on the CAA's use case approach by exploring advanced air mobility and its implications for regulations in the aviation sector. They've also accepted Trax International into the BVLOS sandbox, and you'll hear more from Trax later on during the day. Finally, I'd just like to say that we all share a common interest in ensuring that those companies seeking to use drones do so in the full knowledge of the law and by having access to the right level of expertise. And hopefully this programme can help us provide that and help us to do all the right things in introducing drone use into the UK safely and securely. Thank you.
Thank you, Fozzie. I think we're going to hear from Gordon now. Hi, Gordon.
David, thank you. And thanks, Fozzie. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to do my short piece here in 4 parts. Just wanted to introduce at the start a little bit of context around innovation, how government sees that, and the role of my department, and then dive straight into the story around robotics and our support for robotics, of which drones is an important part. Then dive into drones specifically, and I've got an update on future flight as part of that. And then I wanted to focus also in on something you all need to know about, the National Security and Investment Bill, which is on its way later this year. So I'll give you a short update on that. Apologies, I haven't got any slides. There is actually quite a lot of sort of facts I'll be throwing out as well. And I promise now, just when I finish, to in the chat put some of the core links to the things I'm mentioning. So don't panic if you don't catch it. I'll try to catch the main stuff, as I say in the chat when I finish. So I'm Gordon Baker. I'm in the Technology Strategy and Security team in BAYS. That's the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. It's part of our Business Growth Directorate, and we aim essentially to work with industry and academia to understand the barriers to growth and to develop policy to support underpinning technologies of the future economy. So we work not as part of the Government Office for Science, but with them and with our traditional sector teams across manufacturing, construction, energy, and those other areas. But our focus is technology. Earlier on this month, alongside the budget, the Chancellor announced a document called Build Back Better, our plan for growth. And that's kind of the successor to the industrial strategy document that's been our kind of mantra in our department for a while. It sets out a lot of different things around the future of how we see innovation and how our department's going to go. But in particular, details on the new Advanced Research and Invention Agency, ARIA, which is getting £800 million to set up a new sort of whole structure there. and commits us to publishing an innovation strategy in the summer. So that's going to be the kind of the core document that our department's working towards, and out of which a lot of other activities will flow. So zeroing in on robotics. Robotics has been a big thing for government since about 2013. David Willett set it out as one of the 8 great technologies. And we very much see drones as a sort of component of that. BEIS, as the sponsor department for Innovate UK, do quite a lot of activity to support robotics at the moment. You should know about the knowledge transfer network for robotics and AI. If you don't know, the KTNs do a lot of work to connect businesses to research opportunities and to each other in different sectors. The main funding program for robotics has been going since about 2018. Robots for a Safer World, it's called. It's investing in a lot of the research and innovation around autonomous systems, especially in extreme and hazardous environments, and has focused hubs on nuclear, space, and offshore activities. Drones have received quite a lot of support through this, and it remains as an important program of support for the wider robotics community. There's also, more on the policy side, a new robotics growth partnership, which was set up in 2019 by our minister, essentially to convene, to work, government and the sector working together. And I know that that group is aiming to publish a vision for the robotics sector, in the summer. I'll put links to those, as I say, later on. Focusing on drones, and especially an update from Future Flight. They're very keen to hear back from you on their program, and any thoughts you guys have got on that. So I can answer in the Q&A a bit later on as best I can, but I'll put a link into Simon Masters and his contact details at Future Flight at the bottom of this too. So Future Flight's been going since 2019, also run through Innovate UK. I know many of you know it well, but I just wanted to highlight 3 kind of current things that you should know about. One, recently published on their website, a new socioeconomic study looking at use cases. There's 3 drone use cases there: power line inspection, remote mail delivery, and heavy lift cargo drones operations, so logistics drones. So take a look at that, outline some of the business opportunities in those sectors and those applications. The Future Flight Phase 2 awards are out publicly now. They're quite hard to find, so I'll give you a link to that. It's basically, we publish all the Innovate UK funding in PDF documents every now and then. So there's 5 different PDF documents to look at, all around the different 48 different awards that have been recently announced. For drone support for NHS and emergency services and the wider UTM work. There's a lot of activity in that. So quite a lot of detail, including funding amounts and the partners, and the detailed program stories are there. I'll put the link into that. Also, Future Flight now have a regular Future Flight Fridays YouTube channel, so you can get updates on what they're up to every Friday, and I'll publish a link on that as well. So their next steps, 3 next steps to be aware of: a safety case report will soon be coming out, looking at enabling safe development of and integration of sort of human-controlled and autonomous aircraft as we go forward with integrated risk and safety management systems and the supporting infrastructure. That's number 1. Number 2 is a new research director is going to be appointed to lead a program of social science public perception type of activity. So that'll be announced, I think, reasonably soon. And then obviously they're working hard to get the machine going for Phase 3 of the competition later on this year. So Simon Masters is the contact. I'll pop his details up when I finish as well. The last 2 things I wanted to cover then are just to make you aware of the Drone Industry Action Group, and then, as I said, about the National Security and Investment Bill. So the Drone Industry Action Group was set up back in 2016 by my Secretary of State at the time, and Ian Gray is the chair. At that time, there was no CAA sandbox, no Future Flight program, and only a very rough outline of the Pathfinder. So it came at a time when industry and government weren't really very clear about each other's needs, and so it's essentially trying to be that conduit of information between government and the sector. I'll put a link into the website for that as well, and you can see what it's been up to over the last few years. And then, so finally from me, the NSI bill is coming out later on this year. So National Security Investment, the context of this, it's updating the 2002 Enterprise Act, which allows government to call in mergers and acquisitions and investments that it feels are against the public interest or national interest. This bill actually narrows the scope quite specifically to national security issues. So it's trying to essentially set a clear structure where we encourage inward investment into the UK, but we safeguard our national security and the safety of our citizens. There are a few acquisition areas and a few technology areas where there's anxieties about whether those might cause national security risks. Advanced robotics are one of the mandatory, there's 17 mandatory notification sectors. So if you are a company in any of those sectors, any of those 17 sectors, and you are looking to take investment or be taken over, then you need to notify government about that. It's going to come into effect later this year. Autumn is the current best guess, but it's essentially it's something that you need to know about. I'll put the link in the chat again in a second. But essentially, it's about giving structure and confidence in the acquisitions and investments that you get. But it does have a requirement to notify government and get a response, and we commit to coming back to you in 30 days of you notifying us. So that's the run through from me. As I say, there's quite a few links I'll put in the chat in a second. And thanks very much for your time. I'm sorry I didn't have any slides to put this down very easily for you to follow, but as I say, in the chat. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gordon. I think we're going to hear from Howie now. So go for it, Howie.
Thanks, Gordon, and thanks, David, and good morning to everyone. I will just quickly introduce myself to those who have not been to our previous community event. My name is Howie Chow, and I'm currently the technical lead for the Drone Pathfinder program. The Drone Pathfinder program is part of a wider program of work, both government-led and across the UK's public and private sectors. And the aim of this is to enable the integration of drones into the UK airspace through understanding the major technical, operational, and regulatory opportunities and barriers that exist for the adoptions of drone technologies. And over the last few years, we've taken on projects under the program which aims to push the current state of play. And the benefits to projects joining the program is to help inform government roadmaps, policies, as well as future regulatory constructs and access to the Innovation Hub services. Next slide, please. Next slide. As of today, we have 4 live Pathfinder projects, including a consortium led by CZI, who are developing and demonstrating the local BV loss in controlled environments, such as industrial sites from a central control room. Secondly, a consortium led by Wales and West Utilities called Above and Beyond, which aims to transform gas and electricity's network maintenance processes by demonstrating BV loss area inspections of network infrastructure. Thirdly, a consortium led by Cranfield University to demonstrate BV loss area imaging with machine learning research to detect marine ingress near nuclear power plants. And finally, we're also pleased to announce our newly onboarded Pathfinders called Airspace Integration of Drones in Response to COVID-19. And this project is led by Trax International. For this project, the consortium will be aiming to deliver operating environment where all suitably equipped airspace users are detected and presented back to the operators to enhance situational awareness of airspace users equipped with the technology. John Henderson at Trax International will be providing an overview of this project in the industry presentation later. And there will also be a few updates from other projects, including John McKenna from CCI presenting about how they're enabling economies of scale with control room-based BV loss operations. And Jenny Cook from Maritime and Coastal Agencies will be presenting about their BV loss trials, outcomes, and lessons learned. So please stay tuned to hear from them later. Next slide, please. We're always looking for more projects that are pioneering in the industries to join the Pathfinder program. So please do get in touch through our CPC drone inbox or myself directly to see how you can become a Pathfinder. Our website link on the screens will take you to the Pathfinder application webpage, where you can find the associated documents, including applications, guidance, and terms and conditions. The process is very simple. You may make a request for an application form, return the completed applications, and the Pathfinder steering groups will review these against the criteria. And please note that your projects must be already funded and tackling one of the operational or safety challenges identified in a guidance document. If you do have any questions, so please leave them in the chat or join our Pathfinder Catalyst Q&A sessions later. I will now hand over to Fozia Chugtai from Department for Transport, who will be talking about our new exciting Pathfinder Catalyst program. Thank you.
Thanks, Howie. Fozia?
Thanks, David. Howie. So the original Pathfinder programme was established in 2018 to identify and overcome the technical and operational barriers to adoption of drones by supporting businesses to develop drone service use cases, run physical demonstrations, disseminate best practice across industry, and build public confidence in the responsible use of drones. Government is supporting the CPC's existing Drone Pathfinder, which has the benefit of convening government regulators and the sector to develop novel examples of drone use and capability. Some of those which you've heard from Howie earlier, and you'll hear from more later on in the presentations. DFT funding for the programme was due to end in March 2021, and its future was uncertain. However, the Shared Outcomes Fund was announced in the 2019 spending review and aims to pilot new and innovative approaches to tackling problems where the policy solution requires collaboration between two or more departments. So in February last year, DFT and BAYS submitted a business case to Treasury for funding to expand the existing Drones Pathfinder project into this new Catalyst programme. I'm pleased to say that the 2020 spending review included 1.6 million of new funding through the Shared Outcomes Fund for drone technology. The Catalyst programme will provide match funding to UK businesses and other organisations to undertake drone trialling activity and disseminate learning on commercial drone use across the UK economy. I'll now hand you over to Chris to take you through the details of the Catalyst programme.
Thanks, Fozia. Good morning, I'm Chris G, and I'm the technical lead now on the next phase of the programme, which is, as Fozia said, is known as the Drone Pathfinder Catalyst. The Catalyst is really a one-of-a-kind programme, and it's focused on driving the adoption of drones and embedding the technology across a range of industry sectors. Drone technology and solutions are developing at pace. My LinkedIn and social media are filled daily with the latest innovations, and this has led to the industry uptake of being technology-led. And whilst we've had successful projects, adoption has been slower than anticipated. So we're talking to many organisations, and they've got great ideas about how to use drones within their organisation and business, but they're really unclear about how to progress because they come across uncertainties around things like governance, regulation, and technology. So our role on this programme is to help remove the obstacles and join up the dots. We need to help industries and organisations understand where drones could help their business and add value, and we need to shape these opportunities with them. In parallel, we need to be able to help drone solution providers articulate their propositions so that industry can better understand the benefits. There are also opportunities to share lessons learned across industries and where drones have been used for similar applications. Actually, can we just move on to the next slide, please? Brilliant, thank you. So we see adoption of drone technology very much like any other business transformation, albeit it's got some additional complexity around understanding the regulations for drones. So the technology and the flying are part of a bigger picture that we need to address for successful adoption. So the programme is going to drive adoption, and it's going to be structured across these four themes. So we're going to be looking at industry engagement, demonstrations, innovation, and public dialogue. And I'll run through these in a little bit more detail now. Next slide, please. So the Pathfinder to date has been very successful at engaging with the drone industry, and will continue to do this through these types of community events. And we're also looking at how we can set up sector-specific events so that solution providers can showcase their propositions. A big emphasis of the programme moving forward now is how we also engage with the non-aviation sectors, where there's a huge potential for drones to deliver benefits. We're engaging at a regional level through local authorities and local enterprise partnerships to understand how drones can be used to support economic growth based upon local priorities. And we're also engaging directly with industry through collaboration with industry bodies and with individual organisations. Our objectives are to explain what's possible, shape opportunities for drone use, help overcome obstacles, and transfer knowledge between sectors. We've structured the programme into quarterly phases, and in each quarter we'll be focusing on particular industry sectors. For the first quarter, we're focusing on the regional engagement mentioned earlier, and also looking at construction and housing sectors. And we've already started to identify huge potential in both of these sectors. Through the engagement, we're also creating a best practice toolkit to help organisations understand how to adopt drone technology. And the first thing we'll be releasing shortly will be a drone readiness assessment tool, and this outlines the steps and considerations for using drones at an enterprise level within an organisation. Next slide, please. There have been many reports and case studies produced about the potential benefits of drones. Many of these are very informative, but they don't always bring the examples to life. So to address this, we'll be running demonstrations through the year to showcase how drones can be used. Initially, the demonstrations will be focused on what can be delivered with today's technology and within the existing regulatory framework. As we progress through the year, our aim is to deliver more ambitious demonstrations that extend our understanding of more complex environments. So this might include things such as beyond visual line of sight and UTM. We recently ran a request for information, and we did this to build a catalogue of solution providers that could help us deliver these demonstrations. And that was really successful with over 60 responses. We'll also use these responses to help broker introductions across the sector where we believe there could be mutual benefit. Our aim is to help align industry requirements with solution providers that can help. We're now scoping the initial demonstrations that will be aligned with the construction and housing sectors. Examples that we're exploring include cladding inspections, thermal inspections aligned with delivering net zero carbon, and then also vegetation management across estates. And we're working closely with RPAS on both the engagement and shaping of these demonstrations. Demonstrations will also be producing case studies and economic analysis to understand the potential benefits that could be delivered if drones are used and adopted more widely across the sector. Next slide, please. In partnership with DFT, we're running something called DTRIG, and this stands for, it's a drone-specific technology research and innovation grant program. The application deadline for DTRIG is actually midnight today. We're focusing on 3 themes for DTRIG, which is onboard, detect and avoid, autonomy, and communication and navigation. We'll be awarding £30,000 to up to 6 successful applicants to advance their research and become a step closer to commercial exploitation. In addition, we're also continuing the existing Pathfinder program that Howie previously mentioned. So through the Pathfinder program, we're able to support projects that are delivering pioneering solutions, such as the Beyond Visual Line of Sight programs that Howie already talked about, and you'll hear about later. And for Pathfinder projects, we can help with areas such as CAA engagement and market exploitation. Next slide, please. So with most new and emerging technologies, adoption depends on customers and communities seeing the value of the new services being provided, and we need them to embrace them, rather than resist the change. So without public acceptance, drone adoption simply won't happen. We'll be running a research and engagement program as part of the program to understand public views of drones and address public acceptance so that we can pave the way for drone deployment across multiple industry sectors across the country. So through this, we want to increase public knowledge of drones to reduce misperceptions, and we also want to enhance public understanding of the benefits of drones. And in addition to this, we also want to understand the current perceptions and opinions of drones, including the main drivers of attitudes, so that we're able to influence the wider public. Through the work, we'll develop recommendations for public-centered approaches. So this will enable future engagement, including key messaging that will facilitate deployment of drone services. And then a key thing that we'll also be doing as well is developing an effective feedback loop to the drone industry and relevant stakeholders within the sector, so that we can ensure that public opinion and acceptance is factored into the solution development. Next slide, please. So in summary, the programme will drive adoption of drones across the UK. A key part of the programme is engagement, and we will really welcome discussion about how you can participate in the programme. So here's a quick recap on the ways to get involved. The first is around industry engagement. So we're particularly keen to talk to industry bodies and organisations that can help us engage with industry sectors that would benefit from drone technology. The second area is around demonstrations. So we're seeking organisations to act as hosts for demonstrations, and they will be sector-focused demonstrations. Like I mentioned earlier, the first phase being housing and construction. And we're also looking for solution providers that can help deliver those demonstrations. The next area is to become a Pathfinder project. So if you have a pioneering project that you're working on, then it would definitely be worth exploring how to become a Pathfinder. And then finally, if you've got any general questions, please get in touch with myself directly, or you can contact us via the drone's email address, which is on the slide. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to David.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris, and everyone else for speaking. So we're going to move to the Q&A session for the committee presentations. So just as a reminder, if you've got any questions, pop those in the chat, and we're going to run through those. So yeah, if I could ask all the panelists to bring their cameras up so we can see your faces, and we'll get to some of the questions. So the first question we've got coming in from Paul Fraser-Benison, maybe a question for Gordon, but feel free to pass this around, guys. So what effect will the loss of EGNOS Safety of Life service at the end of June this year have? What effect will that have on the project?
That is not one I can take, I'm afraid, David. I don't know anything about that.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone in the audience knows, or Chris, yeah.
Yeah, hi, it's Andrew Chadwick. Can I? Oh, you're taking that. Who's taking that?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question, and actually a really important one as well. So Brexit has resulted in UK no longer subscribing to EGNOS Safety of Life from June, which means that GPS approaches in the UK cannot be flown anymore. So it will make it almost impossible for small airports to gain instrument approaches. And also it will hurt the rollout and widespread use of drones. Obviously, for drone operations, we have to rely on precise positioning and for navigation, air traffic management, and electronic conspicuity. So, and also without it, autonomy is going to be tricky, I think, at best. It's also going to have a negative impact on UTM development, and at least until we get an alternative system or we develop a different or alternative approach. So pulling out is not really the best of ideas. In fact, it's probably a significant retrograde and quite an undesirable step. So it will have an effect on the project we're doing. We've not gone into a great deal of detail yet of that. Obviously, there will be some work. Part of what we do within the Pathfinder program is to look at these challenges and barriers, and this would just be one of those that we'll be seeking to address in some way. The issue is not in accuracy, just for those online really. Multi-source GNSS receivers are very good, so you can get to sub-meter accuracy in 3 dimensions, but the problem is going to be in integrity. And so how do we know which signals are accurate and reliable, and also which satellites to reject if the data's erroneous? So it will have a serious knock-on effect, not just on the drone business and industry, but also on aviation, I think, generally, and obviously other services that rely on GPS signals. So I think that's the best answer we can give you at the moment. It's something that we're aware of, and something that we'll be looking at in the coming weeks and months.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew, for that question, and thanks for the question as well. So the next question is from Sean Greenberg, and he says, "Hi everyone, thanks for the information. When will the Catapult be looking to do demonstrations across the utility and energy sectors for autonomous inspection of assets?" So maybe one for Chris or Howie to talk about the kind of structure of the Catalyst program.
Yeah, I can take that one. So basically, we're being quite agile in the way that we are addressing the quarters. So we've sort of provisionally penciled in when we might be targeting individual sectors, but that's yet to be finalised. We'll be doing that towards the end of the first quarter, as we roll into the second quarter to work on which sectors we're going to focus on. So at the moment, there is an opportunity. So if there, the question's just disappeared from in front of me. If there is if there's an interest in a specific sector that you would like to engage with, then it'd be really good to hear from you, because as I mentioned in the presentation, we're looking for both organisations that could host a demonstration and also solution providers that could deliver. So if you're sort of either side of that equation, I think asset inspection will certainly be something that we'll be looking at doing within the utility sector. So yes, please do get in touch, and we'll explore how we can factor that into the programme.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris.
David, could I dive in and just say, actually, that's one of the future flight, that socioeconomic study does actually try to dive into that specific use case challenge. And so there's a bit of information in there. Definitely worth having a look at too.
Brilliant, thanks, Gordon. So we've still got a couple more questions, about 7 minutes for this session. So another one for Chris, actually. So I'm interested, so Quentin Brown, I can't see the end of your name, sorry. I think it's Quentin Brown. So for Chris, I'm interested in your work on the public's views on drones. Difficult to get public's views if they've not experienced drones. So the phrasing of the question and the information given to the respondents is vital. How are you going to go about the research, and what is the timing?
Yeah, so I think maybe Andrew and I do a double act on this one. So basically, yeah, we're absolutely sort of aware that with this kind of engagement process needs to be very carefully managed, and you don't kind of want to lead the audience. So this piece of work actually, CPC will be program managing, but we've gone out to tender to organisations that specialise in public dialogue, and we've taken advice on the tender specification itself from specialists in this area, such as ScienceWise. So whilst we're managing this piece of work, we're very cognizant of the fact that it's very specialist, and there are organisations out there that do this day in, day out, and have expertise. So we will be contracting. I think we've had quite a lot of interest, several tens of organisations looking to respond to the RFP. So we'll be selecting a partner to work with over the coming weeks, and that piece of work will be kicking off within the next couple of months, and then that will be due to deliver towards the end of the year.
Just adding on to that as well, part of the requirement and what we will be doing is having, probably unlike a lot of other pieces like this, is actually a proper engagement with the public. So rather than just having a number of telephone conversations and the like, is actually doing some engagement, obviously COVID permitting at the moment, which would include some public experience days. So experience shows that when people get to see this technology, they get it very quickly and they understand the benefits. that it can bring, and also recognise that perhaps some of the challenges that we in the industry might think are there don't really have much substance, to be perfectly honest. What we're looking to do through the programme is to do that proper engagement and to have those experience days as best as we possibly can. But it's an excellent question, and it is vital that in any engagement like this is we get the messaging right and also the questions right, and how we approach that. So thank you.
Brilliant, thanks guys.
I also had a second on that, David.
Can I just ask the other panelists, is anyone else having trouble with Gordon's connection?
Just to say that future flight, as I mentioned, is appointing with the ESRC a new research director. Sorry, can you hear me, David? Well, I just finished my point. So Future Flight's going to do some work on it, but secondly, PwC did a survey, Trust in Drones, post Gatwick, that's got some interesting reflections on it as well. I'll put the link in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon. It cut out a little at the start, but I think we caught you at the end there, so thanks for that. So there's a few more questions. Some of them are specific to the Pathfinder Catalyst, so we'll cover those at the end, but thank you very much for asking them. I think we'll just ask one more in this session. And that question comes from Barbara Pereglio. Sorry if I mispronounced that. So the question is about the ESA regulations. So it's, if I understood correctly, the UK is not doesn't have to follow the ESA anymore. What is the plan for the future? To try to align as much as possible, or should we expect differences? So I don't know if...
I think it's probably more of a question for the CAA more than anything else. Our understanding is that we're trying to align as much as possible, but there will be specific instances where the UK will have their own regulation. What they're going to be, we've yet to see. But I think it's probably more of a question for the CAA. Unfortunately, couldn't make it this morning. Okay,
thanks, Andrew.
There is another question. Can I just go the question before that on the mountain rescue guys? So Darren Williams. If you do contact us, we'd be delighted to talk to you about your project, please. We got contact details, I think, at the end of the slide set, which give you the details of the drones team. But if you contact us through there, we'll be delighted to speak to you about your project.
Brilliant. So, like I mentioned, I think the rest of the questions we'll probably look to cover off in the dedicated session later, which means we can move on to the next part of our agenda today. So we're going to be moving to the industry presentations, and we've got, like I said, 5 presentations. They're going to be 10 minutes each with 5 minutes for questions immediately after each presentation. So do remember to put your questions in the Q&A box during the presentation, and we'll get to those in the 5-minute slot. So yeah, I'd like to hand over to John Henderson, please, from Trax International. Thanks, John.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm John Henderson from Trax International. I'll take you through the project we're doing down at Goodwood, which is trying to enable beyond visual line of sight operations in non-segregated airspace. I believe I have control. There we go. It's jumping a number at a time. Okay, so background behind this trial is, most of you will be aware, at the minute, most, if not all, beyond visual line of sight operations in the UK take place in temporary danger areas because the requirement is that unless the UAV and the UAV operator can demonstrate a detect and avoid capability as good as the see and avoid of conventional aircraft, then the activity needs to take place within segregated airspace where no other aircraft users are allowed for safety reasons. Lots of TDAs have been established over the past 12 to 18 months, becoming more and more frequent, and they're not a long-term sort of practical solution for BV loss operations. One, because of the sort of the complexity and length of time it takes to establish them. Two, the impact it has on other airspace users, not allowing them in there. And three, actually, it just increases segregation and airborne risk. What we're trying to do, we've got a number of companies together, ourselves, Trex, a company called Avionics, Planefinder, ANRA Technologies, and we're working together with the Aviation Innovation Centre at Goodwood and Goodwood Aerodrome, and also Skyports as a UAV operator, as well as another UAV operator, Auriga Aerospace, to try and demonstrate a concept of safe beyond visual line of sight operations in non-segregated airspace. So eventually, what we'd like to do is demonstrate this concept within a transponder mandatory zone. So as long as airspace users have a certain level of electronic conspicuity, then they can access the airspace without speaking to ATC, without any clearances required. And this gives visibility of all aircraft in the area to create a known surveillance picture for the UAV operator. In order to do that, we can't just say to the CA, we want to do that in a TMZ. We have to develop the safety assurances. And for that, we actually, ironically, need a temporary danger area in order to gain those assurances. So the project's partners, ourselves, Trex International, we focus on airspace change and regulatory approvals, IFP design, and we've run a number of live airspace trials over recent years at airports. We're working with Avionics. They're experts in state-of-the-art airborne avionics equipment. They have some very, very nifty small ADSB and even Mode S transponders that UAVs and small UAVs can actually carry now, and they deploy a series of ground stations as well to soak up ADSB transmissions. We're working with ANRA Technologies. They are providing the UTM software platform, which basically takes in the surveillance information, lots of other information, obstacles, terrain. It maps out the flight plan for the drone, and then can provide alerts, warnings, whistles to the UAV operator. It can potentially give suggestions for avoidance capabilities. It does not provide, that platform does not provide the avoid capability. It is essentially fusing information to provide the situational awareness to give the UAV operator the detect capability. And we're also working with Planefinder. Many of you would have heard of Planefinder. They have a global surveillance network. They're bolstering that network. And importantly, what they bring is the ability to multilaterate the Mode S signals across their installation. And that information goes along with the UAvionics information to ANRA to fuse into the system. We have the Aviation Innovation Centre, which is at Goodwood. They've recently established themselves as a test centre, test bed for drone and UAV related activities. And they've kindly, in conjunction with Goodwood Aerodrome, let us host the trial there. And as mentioned already, we have Skyports. Skyports are an experienced BV loss operator, and they've been operating in a number of different temporary danger areas across the UK. So what the solution is we deploy a robust network of receivers and transmitters, and we soak up the information from airborne devices. That information is relayed, it's fused into the Smart Skies platform to be provided to the UAV operator. So importantly, it is not at this stage an autonomous system. It is not giving this information to the drone for the drone to autonomously avoid. It is to inform human decision making. At the same time, we will be rebroadcasting that surveillance information via TSB transmissions on the 978 frequency, along with other pertinent flight information on a FISB transmission, which will be the first of its type in the UK. What that gives is increased situational awareness to all airspace users. That when I say all airspace users, any airspace user that is equipped with ADSB in, they can then see this information. They will be able to see where drones are, for example, other airspace users. They will have live information on the airspace environment, temporary danger area, for example. And then importantly, we'll be developing the sort of the protocols, the rules for what a UAV operator can and can't do, which is with that information, which is probably one of the biggest challenges we've got at the minute. So we're trying to create a long-term solution that enable safe UAV operations alongside conventional manned aviation in non-segregated airspace. As I've said before, we don't believe that TDAs are a long-term solution. And we want to enhance the safety of day-to-day operations in Class G airspace by actually broadcasting information. So that would be an H24 thing. Even when there's no UAV operations going on, that surveillance picture can be rebroadcast to other airspace users. And we have to do that by gradually building up safety assurances within a temporary danger area, within the segregated airspace, hopefully leading to a demonstration in a TMZ at the end. So we're doing this down at Goodwood Aerodrome. It's a busy GA aerodrome. It's 3 egress runways. A flight information service officer provides a FIS service to aircraft within their ATZ. And as I said, it's a busy piece of airspace in surrounding, which comes with its own challenges. We're often asked why have we picked Goodwood to do this? Essentially, it's because we need to pick somewhere to prove the concept can work. We can't prove that it works where very few aircraft fly. We need to prove that this can work in a fairly dense airspace environment. I've talked to a lot of this already, so this is more of the specifics now. So we're enhancing Planefinder's existing surveillance of the coverage of the Goodwood area with their own deployment and also enhanced extra UAV systems. What we'll be doing is we'll be detecting ADS-B, Mode S, and the Mode S will be MLATed by Planefinder, and we'll also be taking FLARM signals. So FLARM is generally used by the gliding community, but others as well. The TISB, the Traffic Information Service broadcast, will rebroadcast the Mode S MLAT information and also FLARM information. And the ADS-B will be rebroadcasting itself. That's the way it works. And the FISB transmissions will include things like status of the TDA or TMZ. We've received the broadcast licenses from Ofcom to transmit on the 978 frequency. Whilst we are detecting FLARM capabilities, if we get to the stage of getting a TMZ at the end, FLARM does not enable access to the TMZ. It will require Mode S or ADS-B out as a minimum. The current policy on transponder mandatory zones from the CAA requires Mode S, but they're in the process of enhancing that policy to enable what's known as CAP 1391 compliant devices as well. At the minute, FLARM isn't a CAP 1391 approved device, so therefore it won't get access to the airspace. So we've started our testing now of the surveillance. The surveillance coverage is really important for this. We need to know sort of inside and out around the area exactly what the surveillance coverage is, down to what level. We need to understand the accuracy and latency of that. We need to understand what happens if we lose receivers. We need to understand exactly what the UAVs that will take part in the trial can and can't do, what their behavior is. And we've already started some initial VLOS testing, of course, which we don't need a TDA for. A TDA becomes available from the 8th of April, but it's not going to be a permanent H24 TDA. It's going to be activated on a sort of required basis. What we've been doing is we've identified a number of BVLOS routes and off aerodrome landing areas. So we've secured landowner permission for a number of sites around the TDA where we can demonstrate a number of different UAV capabilities. Those areas have to avoid obstacles and terrain. They have to avoid populated commercial residential areas. So you can see all those things mapped out on the right. We've even got Chichester Council wanted us to sort of safeguard for future planning applications as well. And then what we'll be doing when we've tested all of the systems and the surveillance is we will gradually introduce controlled fixed and rotary traffic into the TDA. So members of our teams are pilots already, and we'll be doing a number of sort of fixed sorties and scenarios demonstrating how we can integrate manned and unmanned aviation. Challenges, a lot of challenges, more answers and questions, more questions than answers at the minute. One of the big ones we know is that the technology behind this is it's advanced, it's complicated. Getting the surveillance coverage, putting the installation out is very challenging indeed, and has been even more challenging through COVID restrictions. We've not been able to test the surveillance coverage because there hasn't been the general aviation in the air to help us check that surveillance coverage right now. But importantly, even when we've got all this working and that information is provided and presented to the UAV operator, what they can and can't do with that information and how far away from other aircraft, they need to stay in Class G airspace where there's no defined separation standards. There's no, you must be 3 miles or 1,000 feet. So that's going to be really sort of important. That's going to be really challenging as to what they can and can't do. They're not air traffic controllers. They're not necessarily pilots. And innovation, as we all find, is that a lot of the time the rules haven't been made for this. So we can't go to the CA and say, please, can you tell us what this is? It's a very much a two-way process here. And what we actually want to do is help shape future regulatory policy and provide information to unlock BV loss operations in the future. So hopefully I raced through that in 10 minutes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Yeah, no, that was great. Perfect timing. So we've got 5 minutes for questions now, and we've got a few in the chat, so I'll take you through those now. So the first one is from Paul Fraser-Bennison. So this is a question for you. So Europe appear to favour U-space. What is your view on that direction of travel?
Do I have a view? I probably don't have a view on that at the minute. The TDA we've established is up to 2,000 feet, and some of the challenges we got when establishing that is why do you need to go up to 2,000 feet? UAVs generally are going to operate down at a low level, down at 400 feet. Therefore, it becomes their own airspace down there, their sort of use space. Why do you need to go up to 2,000 feet? And the answer to that question is what we're trying to do is provide a solution that enables as many operating concepts as possible. And whether UAV operations are going to be constrained to circa 400 feet and below in the future, I don't know. We wanted to demonstrate actually being able to go higher than that. One of the reasons that the temporary danger area was so big as well was to is because we're trying not to develop a solution for just one UAV operator, but actually a number of operations in terms of crop spraying, building inspections, deliveries, you name it. I don't think I necessarily have a view on U-space myself, but we're not looking to. For me, that's bordering on segregation.
Brilliant. Thanks for the answer. Okay, so next question is from Adrian. We've only got a few minutes left, but I'll try and get some in. So what are you doing to develop true DAA technology to integrate with all other airspace users in a true non-segregated airspace? Are you expecting all other airspace users to be TISB compatible, including paragliders, etc.?
Okay, so I think that question is sort of suggesting that a TMZ is not actually non-segregated airspace because it attracts a minimum level of equipage to go in. As I said before, it requires ADSB or in or mode S as a minimum. The CA definition at the minute of segregated airspace is that airspace is segregated, so the user inside is segregated from all other airspace users. So when we talk about the term non-segregated airspace, we say no, any airspace users will be able to come into that airspace so long as they have a minimum level of EC, electric conspicuity equipage. So there is some people who think actually it is still segregated, but in the sort of CA definition at the minute, it is still non-segregated. Are you expecting all airspace users to be TISB capable? So no, that we're not using it as a mitigation or a requirement that other airspace users have TISB in and can therefore receive the enhanced situational awareness information broadcast. The minimum requirement is that they have ADSB out or mode S, so they are conspicuous. So as long as they are conspicuous, they can come in and it becomes an onus on the UAV operator to avoid those aircraft.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. I think we've just got time for one quick answer to this last question. And that question is from Barbara Pereglio again. So would you test the power efficiency and the impact on the battery of the drone?
Short answer to that is no, that's not one of our objectives at the minute in terms of testing the sort of battery power of the drone. That's not one of our objectives. Brilliant.
Okay, so I think that's all for that. So thank you very much, John. That was really interesting. And next we're going to hear from John McKenna at Seize AI, talking about close visual inspection in industrial environments, especially with BV loss. So, John, go ahead.
Super. Thanks very much. Well done, John, for sticking to time. I'll see if I can do the same. Hi, everyone. So my name is John McKenna. I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called Seize AI. We're a BV loss pioneer, one of the 4 companies in the Pathfinder, and one of the original companies invited into the Civil Aviation Authority regulatory sandbox. The aim of my presentation today is to introduce the business to those that don't know us, to expand a little bit more on our technology for those that already know us, and to update the community on our current status, and in particular on some of the tests that we're undertaking. So there we go. Sorry, it's slightly late. So, I mean, as everyone knows, right, visual line of sight regulations got this industry started, and while fit for purpose, these regulations are now limiting the drone industry's potential. Ultimately, this is because the visual line of sight model, which requires the pilot to travel to site, is expensive, inconsistent, and very difficult to scale. Again, nothing new. That beyond visual line of sight is the next step, and in particular, beyond visual line of sight from a central control room. This model, in particular, the central control room model of operation, introduces economies of scale, scope, and learning, and hence has significant potential to improve what we can do with drones, but also significant potential to improve the quality and cost of operations. And so we really believe this is the future, or at least the near-term future, for how these systems will be flown. This is ultimately a system of systems problem involving factors that span across hardware, software, infrastructure, regulations, human factors, coordination between organizations, etc. And in that mix, software is an important part of the puzzle, and maybe today, given where we're at, software might indeed be the key part of the puzzle. That is to say, the software that will enable us to deliver safe and scaled BV loss operations today, which will in turn turn into a bridge to autonomy in the future. And this is very much kind of a central pillar to how we've designed our company, aiming to achieve BV loss today, but working towards autonomy in the future. I guess the second design decision that we took when we were developing the business from scratch was we decided to spend quite a lot of time and energy engaging with the wider aviation ecosystem. As a team, as a founding team, we have a lot of experience deploying innovative hardware and software, but not so much experience in aviation. And equally, we recognize that technology and software may be key, but it's actually, it's worth nothing if we can't get it to market. So, we have a huge amount to learn, and it's been a very important part of our business to try to learn by engaging with others, important stakeholders in what we're trying to do. As a result of that outreach work, we joined the Sandbox in September 2019 and the Pathfinder in December 2019. And more recently, we got involved in Future Flight, and we learned a huge amount from all of this type of work in terms of engaging with the grown-ups in the room, how to do this properly. I can't give too much of an update on that, but I can say that after 18 months or so in the Sandbox, our discussions to unlock BV loss operations in non-segregated airspace are very advanced, and I hope to be able to share some good news on that front in the coming weeks. As a business, we're aiming to develop full systems, so systems that comprise our software and third-party hardware, integrated and designed and developed to address very specific use case and sold as a system as a service. Our initial focus is close visual inspection in industrial environments, so in particular across construction, oil and gas, specialty chemical, this type of environment. Sorry. But we see that very much as a start point. I guess we see the ability to fly beyond visual line of sight safely and at scale in the public domain, and even close to people and things, and even in the face of GPS denial or intermittent comms or electromagnetic interference, all of the typical problems one might encounter. We see that core capability as a core competence, and something that's very relevant to lots of other use cases. So as we start in the industrial domain and then extend out into the public domain, looking at electricity networks and telecoms networks and out into road and rail, right through to supporting emergency services, fire and police, and eventually in time, potentially even enabling urban air mobility. So that's very much a long-term future, but we see this very much as a continuum over a period of time. So next, I thought I'd give a very quick overview of how the system works. Essentially, we're deploying highly automated systems, but with a remote pilot that's able to design and monitor the mission from remote, and ultimately with a pilot that is in control and responsible for the mission as it executes. How we do that is the system carries the types of sensors that you would normally see in an autonomous car, so LiDAR and cameras and inertial navigation sensors, and of course GPS and barometer and the usual. And it uses all of that information, fuses all that information to build a real-time understanding of the world it's in, of its environment in 3D, and to do that in real time on board the drone, so that the system then can perform its own autonomous algorithm calculations on board to do collision avoidance and path planning. So it can optimally fly a mission if it's given a high level target. We then leverage quite a lot of intelligence on board the drone, where the drone starts to interpret the 3D environment that it's in. We use that onboard intelligence or onboard environment interpretation to optimize command and control over whatever the network. But for example, the cellular network is something we have done quite a lot of work with Vodafone over the last couple of years. And of course, as we know, the cellular network inevitably varies in terms of bandwidth and latency and even availability. And so we've done a huge amount of work to develop a system that optimizes how we manage remote command and control over variable comms network like telecoms. This approach then allows the remote pilot to set high-level goals that the system executes, managing its own flight control at low level. So the system, as I said before, does its own collision avoidance and path planning once it's given this high-level goal. And then the remote pilot can essentially immerse themselves live in the mission and fly with the drone anywhere they want to be in the three-dimensional world as the flight takes place. And that exceptional spatial awareness that the pilot has of the drone's environment allows them to better control the mission, to do more advanced missions, and ultimately to be able to safely control deployment of these types of systems. One of the things that we've done quite a lot, actually leveraging, so one of the team has won a Formula One World Championships, another one of the founding team has won 2 America's Cups. In both of those worlds, simulation is an essential part of the design process. In both of those worlds, you're limited as the amount of hardware that you can develop. So we do a huge amount of work in simulation, and so we fly all of our flights in simulation, develop all of our stuff in simulation before we ever deploy it in the real world. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that allows us to do a lot of testing and development as the system is deployed, or before the system is deployed. Next, in terms of how the pilot and drone are connected, we connected via the cloud. There's a couple of interesting things about this. So this allows us to develop a system or deploy a system in a way that is extremely scalable and extremely secure, leveraging state-of-the-art cloud technologies. But it also allows us to enable the pilot to work with a remote subject matter expert, so the two design the mission together in real time, or in fact, it enables the pilot to work with other pilots to share control of a mission. So you might, for example, encounter a scenario where a single pilot is having comms problems or has any other type of problem and is able to hand over control or share control with a remote pilot. And this is one of the areas we're exploring with NATS as to how a master control room, which ultimately has the sort of scenario or data availability that the business like NATS would have, which is clearly going to be greater than a drone service provider would ever have, how a business like NATS or a third party with a higher level of understanding would be able to support missions in real time. Clearly not something that needs to be done for lower value, lower risk missions, but as missions get more and more risky, might be a core part of the puzzle. Finally, just as in my quick overview of the technology, so one of the things that the cloud integration allows us to do is it allows us to ingest and use a huge amount of data from every flight, considered like telemetry data in Formula One. And this allows us to ensure that our operation of the system or a third party's operation of the system is in accordance with the system safety parameters, performance parameters. But it also allows us to ingest and learn from each individual flight as it happens. And we ingest and learn from that by being able to replay flights in simulation at any time. And we do that at very significant scale. And we can start to tweak parameters or to replay systems with slight variations to be able to understand how the system might be improved going forward. This leverages one of my co-founders' backgrounds. He led hedge fund software teams developing successful trading algorithms with fiduciary responsibility for billions of pounds. So this is kind of a big data play to be able to understand how to iteratively improve and safely deploy these types of systems. Then a quick update on I guess one of the more interesting projects we're running at the moment. So we led a consortium of 17 companies into Future Flight Phase 2, and we were lucky enough to win a grant to support delivery of a very interesting project. This project has two aims. The first aim, as I mentioned before, our work, we're interested in integrating our solution into the aviation ecosystem and learning from that, and we have a lot to learn. So the first part of the project is collaborating technically with NATS, BAE Systems, Met Office, Sky Futures, Vodafone, Flock, TerraDrone, NVIDIA and Slamcore to understand how our system can be integrated into the aviation ecosystem with ANSPs, infrastructure providers like telecoms, how we can source supplementary data that helps us improve how the system is used. All of this is an area we're really interested in understanding. How do we, to be able to deploy this system safely at scale, these integrations need to be mature. So we're starting that journey now. And the second part of the project is having done these integrations, we then wish to test the system through a range of different scenarios. I guess you would call it a validation and verification journey that starts in relatively straightforward environments like industrial domain, let's say a construction site or an oil and gas facility. And over a period of 10 tests and over a period of 16 months, takes us step by step into increasingly more challenging and more difficult environments. And it finally ends up with a series of tests doing close visual inspection in the public domain across the rail and road network, so across live rail and live road. Clearly super stretching goal for us to be able to do that fully beyond visual line of sight, but that's the interesting journey we're on. Latest, we've executed the test with Skanska. So we flew a system technically beyond visual line of sight on a Skanska construction site. And we've done the same thing with HS2 just a couple of weeks ago. We flew on HS2 site, again, technically BVLOS. I say technically BVLOS as there's a local pilot on site to ensure that we can execute a mission under visual line of sight regulations, but handing off to a remote pilot who can control the mission and partner with the local pilot. And as we step through this project, we aim to be able to actually execute these types of missions BVLOS. And Yeah, I guess we'll be sharing some more information on those tests as soon as we can, and any other news we have on the regulation side as well. There we go, quick overview. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Any questions?
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, we've got some questions in the chat. We've probably got time for a couple of those, so I'll pick some of those questions. And any questions which we'd like to answer later, we'll also circulate those to people if we don't get a chance. But the first question for you, John, is from Jamie Sayer. And they say, have you seen Alexander Lavin et al.'s paper on TRLs for machine learning systems? And is your company using a similar TRL roadmap for AI and machine learning?
I haven't seen the paper, so I'm interested too. But yeah.
Brilliant. Okay,
Yeah.
so the second question is from Mickey Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And they ask, is your system only for single drone control or simultaneous control of multiple drones? In both cases, what do you foresee as the main challenge for multiple drone applications in practice?
So our system is built and designed from the ground up to enable control of a large number of drones. We'll step into BVLOS where a single pilot's controlling a single drone and present at all times. And we aim to extend their span of control over time so a single pilot can control multiple systems, but that's all a bit of a journey, I would say. The first step is just being able to do single drone BVLOS and then multiple drones with multiple pilots BVLOS before we can really start to squeeze efficiency of operations further. But yeah, from the ground up, designed as a scaled way of deploying these systems safely in the public domain. Very much core to what we're doing.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, John. I think we've got some other questions, but we'll try and answer those either in the chat or circulate those later. But that's brilliant. Thanks to John for that presentation there.
Thank you, David.
Okay, so next up, we're going to be hearing from Jen Cook from MCA, with Phil Hanson joining for the Q&A section, and they're going to be talking about drone demonstrations and development and their Pathfinder project for that. So I'll hand over to Jen. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to share with you the outcomes of the MCA Drone Demonstration and Development Pathfinder project. My name is Jennifer Cook, and I'm the Innovation and Future Technology Lead for the MCA Aviation Tech team. Next slide, please, Liam. So just a little bit about the MCA. As we are at the moment, we provide a 24-hour national search and rescue emergency response service throughout the UK, supporting all blue light emergency services, as well as other government departments through the deployment of our search and rescue helicopters and fixed wing aircraft. We operate search and rescue helicopters from 10 bases throughout the UK, consisting of the Sikorsky S-92 and the AW189, as well as our aerial surveillance service based in Doncaster, operating the King Air 200s and the Panther Navajo, all of which you can see there. Next slide, please. So some statistics, first of all, then, to give you some context about the amount of work that we do with regards to search and rescue helicopters first. On average, we fly approximately 2,000 tasks per year over land and sea. Just because it says Coast Guard on the side doesn't mean that we are maritime only. Approximately half of our taskings are on behalf of the emergency services, specifically the police and ambulance services. And this accounts for the majority of our land taskings. The aerial surveillance service came in 2019 and flew 900 hours last year, consisting of search and rescue, counter pollution and salvage incidents, as well as conducting proactive patrols in support of environmental protection, maritime safety and compliance. And in order to maximise value for money and to reduce the time sat on the ground not being used, the MCA involved other government departments in the procurement of that aerial surveillance service, incorporating their requirements in so that it could be used effectively. And as a result, a third of all the flights that, last year were actually flown on behalf of these other government departments, such as Border Force and the MMO. Next slide. The future of the MCA aviation. So search and rescue, helicopters and aerial surveillance service contracts both come to a close at approximately the same time. So it was decided that the MCA would merge both services together for the replacement procurement. which has been called UK SAR2G, although it involves much more than just SAR. The requirements are written to focus on the outcomes and effects and are very much capability based. This is much less prescribed and allows industry, who are the experts in new technology, to provide the solutions to our requirements. And there's a really strong focus on innovation in this, and we fully expect UAVs to feature in some way or another. Next slide. So the benefits of UAVs, so they offer a number of benefits for the MCA. Their increased endurance and ability to carry high-spec sensors increases the effectiveness of search. It reduces the risk to crew of manned aircraft that are currently sent out to conduct search, often in the worst weather conditions. And as well as that, it reduces the risk to personnel on land and sea that support that search as well, providing that situational awareness and a picture of the scene prior to deployment, and then that therefore increases their efficiency and reduces risk to them. UAVs can offer a greater flexibility, as quite often they don't require an airfield, and they can reduce the reliance on search and rescue helicopters. Obviously, the rescue side of the mission may still require a rotary wing aircraft. However, using a drone to carry out that initial search and then supply the helicopter with a precise location for them to then go in, that can save money, time, environmental impact, not to mention the risk to everybody involved. And next slide. So in order to inform the use of UAVs in the future, the MCA conducted the Drone Demonstration Development Project in 2019-2020 to explore and develop the use of UAVs beyond visual line of sight in unsegregated and uncontrolled airspace without the need for special permissions. As I think most of us know, the current methods require TDAs and a huge amount of planning, which is just not possible for reactive search and rescue taskings. So working really closely with a regulator, we conducted some trials in September 2020 using a phased approach and against NCA time critical use cases. So these trials culminated in a flight 300 nautical miles off the UK coast into Irish airspace, and then dropping below control into uncontrolled airspace. This obviously took a lot of work and planning, and the work was captured in a report allowing the MCA to identify and overcome technical, operational and commercial barriers for bringing new BVLOS services to the UK, and also offers key recommendations to the regulator. As well as educating the MCA and the regulator on the use of UAVs in BVLOS SAR and aerial surveillance capacities, the report will also be provided as part of UK SAR2G documentation to inform potential bidders for that. Next slide, please. So looking at the outcomes of the project, the primary outcome for the MCA was that report, which previously discussed, provides some of the necessary information and guidance to make way for drone usage in the future of search and rescue. And the points on the slide there show some of the key achievements taken directly from that report itself, which was completed at the end of 2020 and submitted to the CAA. So just to highlight a couple of those points there, so we had the first unsegregated flight in controlled airspace since Project Claire, and the first to depart from and arrive into the UK and fly internationally. And also at the request of the CAA, we conducted a trial in conjunction with our fixed wing aircraft and our search and rescue helicopter, which demonstrated the use of ADSB mandatory zones in UAS BVLOS operations. Next slide, please. So on to lessons learned. The first one I have there is an airspace infringement and subsequent MOR. So at the very start of the long range flight, we had an unexpected clearance, which was given and accepted. And this resulted in the aircraft going into uncontrolled and unsegregated airspace by about half a mile for literally a matter of seconds. It was all a bit fraught at the time, but actually on reflection, everyone agreed that it was a happy accident, as it showed that nothing really happened, and it gave us some really good points to learn from. Early engagement with the right stakeholders is key for airspace change requests. We missed engagement with DATM, the Defence Airspace and Air Traffic Management, We had engaged with the MOD, but were unaware that datum should be approached separately. So this led to them objecting strongly to our proposals and some difficult discussions. But we settled the issue, and I've since had debriefs with them, datum and the CAA. And the result is much clearer instructions that will be provided by the CAA for anyone applying for a temporary airspace change. A placement of casualty for the coastal search. So due to the TDA location and the casualty being behind a wall, the aircraft actually couldn't get positive identification due to the angle of view. You could literally see the end of the welly boot, that was about it. This just reinforced the need for the ability to be able to move freely in real life search and rescue scenarios. The constraints from the airspace were the only reason that we couldn't get eyes on in that situation. And then finally, slow airspeed in airspace where normal manned operations take place. The winds were quite strong on the day, and the ground speed of our UAS actually dropped to 25 knots. So as the aircraft was at the lowest level and traffic was quite light due to the pandemic, it had less of an impact on other traffic, but it was unexpected for the controllers at NATS. Next slide. So on to challenges, airspace change request. There were some last minute changes to the application process, which meant that the timeline became very short for us. It turned out that we were actually the second request to go through on the new procedures. So it was a bit of a learning curve for everyone, and not to mention the added pressure due to COVID-19 on the CAA. The CAA have now published some clear guidance to help with any temporary airspace changes, which is really helpful. Ofcom license delay. So our license request was submitted late, which meant it was a bit of a last minute panic to get those approvals. I actually reached out to Pathfinder for assistance, and they put me in touch with someone at Ofcom who was able to help push through our application. So that was great. We had some issues with the certificate of airworthiness for the Hermes 900 as it involved a non-EASA supplier. There was no approval in the UK for the aircraft, so it had to be based on the Israeli approval, and with no existing arrangements in place, this took some time, but we did receive it just in the nick of time. And with multiple country airspace, such a long flight going into Irish airspace, getting the right parties around a table to discuss it was a challenge, especially as there was no table as such due to the pandemic, but everyone working from home. It actually worked quite well, and possibly in our favour because we were able to meet regularly. Our weekly meetings started off small, but gradually grew and grew until we had about 20 people from various organisations discussing the flight. It worked really well, and everyone worked really well together, sharing that same vision for the trial. And then finally, our challenge that we're left with now is what do we do now? Phil and myself are keen to keep up the momentum of the work that we have done with the regulator, and are exploring opportunities that will allow us to continue in some way or another. It's quite difficult with the upcoming SAR2G procurement, but we are determined to work together with industry and other agencies with similar goals wherever possible. And next slide. Okay, so that's it from me. Time for any questions. As I joined the team midway through the project, I have Phil Hanson, the MTA Aviation Technical Assurance Manager, joining me to help with any questions you may have.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jennifer. So yeah, please put your questions in the chat, guys, and we'll get to those. I'm going to start off with a question from myself, actually. So I think, I'm not sure if you mentioned it there, but the Drones for Good work that you are doing is kind of related to this program. Wondered if it'd be worth kind of expanding on that and kind of how that's helped public perception.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, okay, Jen. Yeah, thanks, David. So early on, we recognised that obviously drones do have a very bad press. So we set about, both ourselves and the RNLI, set about trying to change the perception. And we came upon the phrase drones for good. So, and we got an awful lot of press coverage saying, look, you know, this is drones for good. This is about life saving. It's not about spying. It's not about shooting people. This is about life saving. that's gained a certain amount of momentum, but clearly there's a lot more to go. And it was kind of almost easy for us, being an emergency service, so to speak. So, and one that actually saves, that doesn't spy. So it was kind of an easy message for us, but we were hoping that that would bleed out through the rest of the industry as well.
Brilliant, thank you for that. A quick question from Sarah. So she says, sorry, Jennifer, I didn't quite catch. What does COA stand for? So maybe just expand on that a little bit.
That is the Certificate of Airworthiness. So that is basically the approvals to fly the aircraft in the UK.
So the aircraft had, as Jen said, the aircraft had a certificate of airworthiness in Israel, but there's no agreement between the UK and Israel to have that transfer. So if it was another EASA state, obviously it would just be straight transferred over, but there's no such agreement with Israel. But we got around it, and it was fine in the end. But as Jen said, it was very, very last minute.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. I think that's all for that one. But yeah, thank you very much for your presentation and for answering the questions. And we'll move on to the next presentation. So we've got Dave Pankhurst from BT talking about unlocking BV loss to realise the future of drone technology. So I'll hand over to Dave. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So, so I suppose first off, just say thanks to the Catapult community for inviting me onto this today. It's been great to hear some of the different companies and also some of the questions coming as well, and great to be able to provide a bit of an overview of some of our activities. A bit of an introduction. Conscious that a number of people won't have come across me or BT in this space before, and I suppose I run what's referred to as drone solutions within BT. My team develops capabilities and partnerships with a view of taking drone-based services to our enterprise customers, and our focus is really across a number of aspects within the drone industry. Now, I think obviously for the purposes of today, conversation around BV loss, what I don't want to do is sort of quote lots of stats that we all know and love in terms of the volume of drones expected by 2030 and such like. But what I would say is that what we're looking to understand and work within the community is the recognition that for drones to reach the kind of scales and volumes that we're looking towards and benefit the UK economy as we see, how can we do that in a way that balances off that opportunity, also with some of the other kind of factors that are mentioned by Fozia and others towards the start of this webinar. And I suppose the other consideration as well is that although, again, we'll be referencing BV loss, it would be remiss of me not to recognise that that's in the context of that obviously VLOS, EV loss operations have existed for quite some time and have developed and grown this market. And so how will BV loss also be in consideration, I suppose, as it develops with those communities as well? So for today, just a couple of slides from me, focusing on our future flight project and also some thoughts around cellular in the context of BV loss. Trying to make the slide move. There we go. So first and foremost, it's with great excitement that we are taking part in the Future Flight programme with our Accelerate project, which we see as a stepping stone, a pathway towards the future of drone flight, enabling BV loss significantly at scale. As part of that, we're working in a consortium of partners with Altitude Angel, that no doubt many are familiar with in terms of the key support from a UTM aspect, and working through with Drone Cloud, Skyports, in terms of more of the, I suppose, drone operations, drone technology with HeroTech 8 as well, and Goka in terms of cyber security, and welcome DroneStream and Skybound Rescuer, who have a huge amount of end user expertise and relationships in some of the organisations that we're looking to work with within Accelerate to learn more about end user use cases and explore aspects, whether it be across medical deliveries, infrastructure inspection, and around rapid response for emergency services. Within that consortium, there's absolutely the recognition that to enable this sort of scaled drone flight of the future, it will be through the integration of different technologies to make that possible. I know earlier John McKenna referencing pieces around software and integration and that kind of thing, and I think that's absolutely a massive obvious component of this. What we are doing, I suppose, as BT within that, not just leading the consortium, but also researching, developing aspects of our cellular network, which I'll step onto on the next slide. Also feeding in comms in terms of some of the ground-based infrastructure we're looking at as part of this corridor. Also looking at how we can feed in some of our existing drone detection capability with aspects from Altitude Angel to better augment, I suppose, and understand the view of the sky to enhance and improve situational awareness with a view of being able to improve sort of conflict deconfliction services within the corridor, within that unsegregated airspace. So it's a really, really important project for us and help us take that forward. Also note that there was a couple pieces towards the start of the webinar talking about public acceptance. We're running a work stream within the project as well, which is looking at that topic and around people's views of I suppose, drones and the drone industry. And I recognise some of the pieces that Andrew, Chadwick and Chris have mentioned previously regarding when people see the value that drones provide. And obviously, especially if that's things in terms of medical delivery, emergency services, that really does change the perception of what people see in drones. And obviously, as we start to scale up the volume of drones, that kind of public acceptance piece becomes even more important. And we'll be looking at how that perception of drones changes during the life of our project. But obviously, that will be influenced by loads of other pieces that are going on within Future Flight, Pathfinder, and other activities across the next year as well. In terms of cellular, I think within the Accelerate project, we're really keen to prove and demonstrate how an existing commercial mobile network can be used as a key component to enable safe BVLOS flight. Recognise that drones today, in the vast majority, don't have any form of SIM connectivity as standard out the box, but there's obviously a number of kind of hook-on devices and different modules that people are looking to try and achieve. This is an area that needs development, conversation and work as a community between the cellular networks with Ofcom and other bodies, and then also taking advantage of the global insight that organisations like the GSMA have in terms of how can we prove out for C2 identity payload that a mobile network can provide a comprehensive, scaled, secure support for those activities. Obviously, it would be daft of me not to talk about the great mobile network that BT has with the mobile network, but to replicate the capability, I suppose, all the performance levels that we get on the ground today, how can we use Accelerate almost to prove out some of those in the air? Because obviously drones at altitude for a SIM card to be in creates a different dynamic than on the ground. However, we believe with a level of optimization, we can offer a brilliant experience. As part of that also, we'll be working with an organisation called Tioco, which a number of you may be familiar with, who have a product called Airborne RF, which enables us to understand more about the coverage level to provide a level of insurance when understanding the flight path to mean that those users that are operating the flight recognise where, I suppose, has good coverage levels and where doesn't, to mean that you can maintain and operate effectively in those circumstances. So we're really keen to prove out that capability and work within industry to ensure that the drones have the right comms path, whatever path we take towards remote ID and a future scaled drone network. And I think that was short and sweet from me. So happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Dave. So yeah, thank you for that. Please continue to put your questions in the chat and we'll work through those. I'm just going to start off with a question from me. So yeah, do you think the technology you're using in Accelerate will be needed across the country for BV loss?
So I think, how do I say, so we've placed Accelerate with Altitude Angel in a really challenging environment in terms of that it is in an urban environment, unsegregated airspace, that getting great support with Dave Walters' Altitude Angel in terms of ensuring that that is working effectively with the CAA, all permissions, all that kind of fun to make sure that happens. Within that, we are deploying quite a lot of technology, essentially, to enable the UTM to be, I suppose, incredibly well educated in terms of what's happening within that airspace, in terms of the different sensors and capabilities that we're incorporating within it, to mean that that airspace is sort of tip top, if you know what I mean, from safety and standards point of view, or potential standards point of view. Now, what I would say is that to create a scaled BV loss environment, is it logical to have that volume of technology in all instances? I would argue probably not. But there's no point, from our point of view at this stage, of with the capability we have available to us, of putting that same tech in a really kind of remote area, which doesn't necessarily prove out all of the problem statements that exist in industry today. And I want to say, I suppose, I hope John McKenny don't mind me saying, I suppose organisations like John's that are maybe looking at that pragmatic approach in certain conditions with some aspects of technology is relevant to certain circumstances. And then as you start to put that in different environments, I'm sure they're looking at, and other organisations are looking at, what extra sort of tech stack do you need to place on top? What I would say is I wouldn't look to incorporate everything that we're doing here if an organisation was looking at flying BV loss in rural Wales or Scotland, where we see a lot of trials happening today. Do I think that a similar a capability would be required if it was on rooftops in the middle of London, as an example? Yes, I probably do. So, but obviously this is a research project, and when we get towards the end of it, I'm sure we'll have tweaked and developed what that looks like during that programme as well.
Brilliant, thanks for that answer. We've got another question here, or it says, not really a question, but more of a point on flying over cellular communications. So there are autonomous drone solutions already being used in industrial environments over LTE safely, using 4G and 5G, and it works great, says Sean Greenberg. So I wondered if you're aware of those or speak about that.
Yeah, no, well, first off, I hope it's on our network if it's working great. So that's the first bit. But I think I suppose the difference there to some extent, although there might be some trials which have been conducted with the support of mobile networks across the UK and internationally, which I have no doubt will work well. And to the gentleman's point, I think it adds to my confidence, I suppose, that it's a great tool for the job. I think what I would say is when you start to scale that up en masse, you start to come into different kind of considerations, and the operational, I suppose, support for that at scale needs to be considered in detail. The advantage is obviously built out on a huge mobile network that already exists, is well supported, operationally secure, all that kind of stuff. But those kind of proof points are really key for us to analyze that data and mean that we can incorporate that across the whole of the network. But it's great to see that people are already witnessing it as a good technology for that purpose. Brilliant, thank you for that.
Another question here from this one's anonymous. So how ready do you think, from talking to people, that the industry is for drones to start using drones? Sorry. I suppose you could think about BT customers and people you've spoken to.
Yeah, so I suppose even within BT, we're using drones. So our OpenReach group already utilise drones today for the purposes of infrastructure inspection and other assets. I think we see across, whether it be the NHSs or port industries or various customers, I suppose there's a difference there between end customers and potentially the operators as well that are using the service. But absolutely, I think a little bit to some of the other context in the earlier pieces, there is, I think, a build-up of willingness, but also some frustration in that they want to start utilising drones, but for it to move to a point of those kind of economies of scale and being worth on a larger part, that's where the kind of BV loss kind of aspect comes in. But what I would say is we do see organisations actively using drones today, as this the wider communities, I'm sure, is actively part of or even delivering those services. But it's that stepping stone towards how do you enable them to utilise a drone almost as just part of their end-to-end workflow to provide an output, to provide something for them, which doesn't require that kind of that human in the loop as much. However, I would say is, and to my point earlier, I think we will move towards a blend where those organisations need some element of automation, and then they might also, and highly likely to still need to use piloted drone flight as well for certain scenarios. I don't think there'll be a one size fits all.
Brilliant, thanks, Dave. We've probably got time for one more question. So this one, it might be one that we want the CAA to answer as well, but I suppose the question from Adrian is, how do you see UAV technology developing detect and avoid to integrate with other airspace users? Is this something that BT has any kind of involvement or stake in?
Not specific at the moment. Back to Adrian. So I think it is a really relevant point in general, I suppose, as to how does all this, whether it be electronic conspicuity, remote ID, all of those existing pieces, and also what's the bar? If I just stay on UAV for a second, what's the bar of kind of expectation for hobbyist recreational users versus kind of independent companies versus fleets? At one layer, and then you add on all of the different airspace users on top of that, and what are the kind of components required. Like I said, within the Accelerate project, we're very much looking at the kind of detection, airspace detection, as part of that broader understanding of the airspace to help enhance the UTM to make the right decisions. Do I think we've got all the answers today? No. Does it need to be part of that consideration with the CAA, DFT and others? Yes, but no, I don't. It's a really obviously valid question.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you very much, Dave. That's all the questions for that. But that's really interesting. Thanks for your time.
Cheers.
Okay. So up next we've got Chris G from the Catapult, and he's going to be talking about the Open Access UTM project. So I'll hand over to Chris. Thanks.
Thanks, David, and hello again. So I'm Chris G, for those of you that didn't catch the first presentation earlier on. And I'm the technical lead on the UTM project. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just over a month ago, I stood in a cold and muddy field, and I don't think that photograph really quite does it justice. This was a culmination of nearly 3 years' work and was a UK first. So we successfully demonstrated multiple UTM systems working together to manage real-world scenarios, and that brought together multiple drone operations. So over the next few minutes, I'll give a quick overview of UTM and how we've developed the Open Access UTM framework for the UK. So we're now witnessing the next phase of aviation development, and this will lead to a significant increase in the volume of drones, and this will be remotely piloted and automated aircraft. This will include small drones for surveying and inspection, through to large aircraft for transporting freight and people, and also uses that we've yet to imagine. And I think what's interesting is the airports of tomorrow are likely to be all around us. So these could potentially be our homes or our workplaces, and we'll also see airports sort of integrated into other modes of transport, such as delivery vans. So most drone flights today are currently operated within visual line of sight of the remote pilot. So this enables the remote pilot to see and avoid any ground-based obstacles and other airspace users. So this can be used, for many practical situations, such as asset inspection and surveying. However, as we've heard across a number of presentations already today, to unlock the maximum potential of unmanned aviation, we need to be able to allow aircraft to fly beyond visual line of sight of the remote pilot, and this is referred to as BV loss. So again, as we've kind of heard, BV loss is currently a little bit of a challenge because it requires permission from the CAA, because it needs to be conducted in segregated airspace. We've heard of the need to operate in temporary danger areas where there's minimal risk to other airspace users. And this approach just isn't sustainable because as the requirements for BV loss get more complicated and the volumes of requests increase, it's going to be very difficult to manage with temporary danger areas. So the challenge is how we allow drone operations within airspace that is shared with other aircraft. And UTM is a key element of this solution. So what is UTM? So UTM is a scalable digital air traffic management system that can monitor and manage drone operations and effectively keep them safely separated using services such as deconfliction and restricting access to volumes of airspace. And in the future, we might even explore how UTM can accommodate more traditional airspace users as their operations become increasingly more automated and digitalized. Traditional air traffic management systems have tended to be centralized either within countries or regions. And due to the forecast volume of drone traffic, the UK, along with the majority of the world, is testing a framework that enables a market-based federated network of UTM service providers. So mobile phone networks, interesting following on from Dave at BT. So mobile phone networks provide a really helpful analogy for this. So the consumer on mobile phone networks have a choice, so they can pick a particular service provider and they get a range of services for an agreed cost. It's envisaged that geographic areas might have multiple UTM service providers, and it would be similar to mobile networks in that the operator will be able to choose which provider most closely matches their requirements. And whilst most services are decentralized in the UTM world, so down to the individual UTM service providers, others will be centralized for efficiency, and the government and the CAA will maintain key roles in ensuring continued safety and equity of the UK's airspace. Next slide, please. So the federated architecture for UTM is effectively a set of interconnected services provided by a range of different entities. And these entities include UTM service providers, data providers such as weather, and central services provided by the CAA, such as registration services for pilots and operators. So whilst this approach to UTM has benefits, it also creates the challenge of ensuring that all UTM service providers have a complete picture of other operations in their geographic area. So for example, I might be flying on UTM provider X, while somebody else might be flying on UTM service provider Y. And if we're in the same geographic area, then both UTM service providers need to be able to talk to each other and share information. And this has to be secure, timely, and effective communication between the UTM network providers. So we need a mechanism to do this, and effectively open access UTM provides the architectural framework for this interoperability. So demonstrating the concept of interoperability between UTM service providers was the primary focus of this project. ASTM, which is a standards developing organization, is developing a set of standards for UTM services and interoperability. And this provided the foundation for the architecture and the APIs for this program. So we demonstrated the services listed out here on the slide, and I'll quickly go through those. So registration, this is as it sounds, it's effectively required to validate pilots, operators, and also service providers that are connected to the open access ecosystem. The next service was strategic deconfliction. So this provides pre-flight and in-flight planning services to ensure that unmanned aircraft maintain safe distances from other airspace users. The next service was monitoring alerting. So this provides live monitoring of individual flights and alerting the flight owner and other airspace users if a particular flight deviates from its agreed plan. And then leading on from that, we've then got in-flight replanning. So if there is a need to change plans, in-flight replanning provides a modification of flight plans after takeoff so it can respond to dynamic changes in airspace. We've then got dynamic constraint management. So this effectively allows individual volumes of airspace to be constrained, so effectively telling airspace users not to access that restricted area. And then finally, we've got remote identification. So this provides a process for identifying aircraft and also provides additional information such as its position, direction of travel, and speed. And then in addition to these 6 core UTM services, we also implemented an enabling service, which is known as the Discovery and Synchronization Service, the DSS. So the DSS is a central service in the architecture. And this plays a key role. So it enables each UTM service provider to identify which other UTM service providers they need to share information with, and then facilitates the exchange of information in a timely and accurate way. Next slide, please. So this was quite a complex project to deliver, and we worked in collaboration with the partners shown on the slide. So we had UTM service providers, and then we had Wing providing effectively the central service, the DSS that I talked about, and then we had drone operator, who was Skylift, who actually flew the live trials for us. So we used an agile development process to quickly implement, integrate, and develop a proof of concept to demonstrate UTM services across multiple UTM service providers. We did extensive testing in a simulated environment before progressing to the live trials. Next slide, please. So this brings me back again to the cold and muddy field. And the trials were set up to demonstrate and validate the functionality of open access UTM using the real world scenarios. There were 3 different scenarios, each designed to prove a specific set of the UTM services I mentioned previously and the interoperability between the different UTM service providers. The trials were based in Leicestershire using Skylift's operational site. And whilst the scenarios had BVLOS operations in them, this was simulated and all flights were carried out within visual line of sight of the remote pilot. Each drone crew had a pilot and a pilot buddy. And the pilot buddy was assigned to oversee the ground control software in the UTM. And this meant that the pilot maintained visual line of sight with the aircraft and had overall responsibility for the safety of the flight. Due to the COVID restrictions, all UTM service providers were off-site. So effectively on-site, we only had Skylift and a limited number of CPC staff. And we coordinated the trials using a Zoom call. And what's quite interesting about this, it actually made it more realistic because the support was provided remotely as it would be in a live UTM implementation. So the first scenario was based around drone delivery and demonstrated strategic deconfliction and in-flight replanning to enable multiple complex proximate operations of drones. The second scenario demonstrated how UTM services allow a diverse set of operations to appropriately coordinate their responses. So we had an emergency drone flight, a fire response, enter the scenario, and the drones around it had to respond to this emergency situation. And then the final scenario demonstrated the remote identification of drones. And then also we demonstrated how services respond, how the UTM services respond when a drone deviates from its approved flight plan, and how then this is communicated between the different UTM services. So effectively we simulated all drones being blown off course, and that effectively then provided notifications to all the other drone operators via their UTM services. So we successfully completed the 3 scenarios on the trial day. We signed off the respective test cards for the trials and collated the defined metrics as evidence. Next slide, please. So this was a great example of a collaborative research and development program, and I'll quickly now run through a summary of the key outcomes. So the live trials were a UK first in terms of demonstrating multiple UTM service providers delivering traffic management services to multiple drone flights. And we did this in the real world scenarios that I described earlier, with all UTM services and support provided remotely. The program proved the concept of a federated UTM architecture and also the ability for UTM service providers to be able to talk to each other, so the interoperability. And we also demonstrated the initial set of the 6 services that I mentioned. And I think a key point of this as well is we also demonstrated the availability of existing technology that was capable of implementing these ASTM UTM standards. Whilst the program focused on technical architecture and interoperability, the live trials also created an evidence base to inform the development of policy and the regulatory framework moving forward. And we'll be able to feed this information into future flight to take advantage of and be able to build on. So CPC and collaboration partners are now well positioned to exploit the research and development. And like I said, looking at opportunities to take that forward in future flight. We'll also be working with government and CAA to help embed the principles in policy, legislation and regulation for UTM. And as the policy and regulation standards and technology mature, one of the things we identified is that the industry will require an approach for testing and certifying new service providers and also services within the open access UTM framework. So this has been a really good learning experience for CPC and all partners involved. And I think this is now, we certainly, in the UK with the partners and CPC, we've developed the ability to run large-scale complex field trials. And I think this positions the UK and CPC as a centre of excellence for future UTM collaboration and research and development programmes. We will be publishing a programme report, which is just in its final stages of being produced. And likewise, we've also got a film of the trials, which is going through final production phases at the moment. And so we will plan to run a separate webinar on UTM in the near future, where we can go into a little bit more detail on the open access UTM and kind of how we'll be taking that forward in the future. So thank you, and I'll hand back to David.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Chris. So we've got a few questions there, so I'll try and get through a couple of these. So the first one's from Richard Ryan, and the question is, how do you see the criteria of priority of flights developing that ensures equity for all users on the basis that remote ID is fully functioning?
Thank you, Richard. I see you've asked quite a lot of questions, and I'll probably pick up with you afterwards as well, Richard, to try and answer some of these. So I think, one of there will need to be a mechanism in UTM in terms of how flights will be prioritised. That's both in terms of sort of categories of airspace users, and also in terms of when we get to actually doing things like dynamic replanning of flights, there'll need to be reprioritization around that as well. And actually, one of the recommendations out of this piece of work is that there needs to be sort of policy and then implemented within a regulatory framework to support prioritization of airspace users within UTM, to ensure that we do have that equity.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. I'll ask one of the others as well, maybe the one that's maybe would appeal to a wider audience. So the question is, who owns the data that is transferred between different UTM service providers?
Yeah, Good question again, Richard. And I think we've had this conversation previously. I think this is a really interesting area. And one of the recommendations that we, again, have made through this piece of work is that there does need to be a legal framework for a UTM sort of ecosystem, particularly in a federated environment like we've tested, because there are all sorts of considerations about one UTM service provider making a decision based upon the data provided by a third party. And there are some sort of really interesting, questions around data ownership, accuracy of data, etc. So I'd be really interested to pick that up with you, Richard, offline and explore that in more detail.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. And I think there's probably time for one more quick question. Are you aware of and plugged into the work the ISO is doing on UTM standardization? So I suppose it's a kind of broader question about how this project interacts with standards.
Yes, so we are aware of the ISO standard. This piece of work was developed around two standards, both being developed by ASTM. And the first standard there is a published standard for remote ID. And then the second standard is actually a work in progress. So it's sort of final stages of draft. And that was all about effectively UTM interoperability and sharing of data between the UTM systems. So I think that there is a much greater opportunity for the UK to get engaged in the development of standards moving forward, and I think that would be a really positive thing for the UK to do, and it'd be interesting to explore the best way of doing that. And again, there's another recommendation in the report about how we can potentially take that forward.
Brilliant. We've actually just got one more question. I think it's an interesting one, so I'll ask that and then we'll move on to the next section. So this is from Chris Daniels. He says, can you say a few words about where digital twins are progressing with regards to UTM?
To be honest, David and Chris, thanks for the question. It's not something that we've particularly explored in this piece of work. Maybe we can pick that up offline, Chris, and get to the bottom of sort of what you're getting at in terms of that specific question. I'll see if I can help address it offline. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you everyone for your questions on the industry presentations just then. So we're going to move on to the next set of the next part of the agenda. So I'll come on video now and I'll ask the panelists for the next section to do the same as well. So just a reminder, what we're going to be talking about now is the Drone Pathfinder Catalyst program, and we're going to be answering some of the specific questions that you guys had on that, and kind of opening up the floor for the panelists to discuss these things. So on the panel, we're going to have Fozia from the DFT, we're going to have Gordon from Bayes, Andrew from CPC, Chris and Howie also from the CPC. So I think you've seen these guys before, so familiar faces. So yeah, thanks for coming on, guys. So everyone who's still watching as a participant, do ask any more questions about the Drone Pathfinder Catalyst program in the chat, and we'll get to those. So I'm going to open up with a question from myself, because we've heard about so many interesting projects on this call. I thought it would just be good to remind us all what we're talking about specifically for the Drone Pathfinder Catalyst. So maybe a question to Chris. What's the kind of high level objective and kind of scope of the Catalyst program? Yeah, so I guess just to summarize, our objective with the Drone Catalyst program is to drive UK adoption of drones. And we're looking to do this across a broad range of industries.
And I think that the way that we're going to do that is effectively, on the one side, we've got industries that can benefit from drones. And then on the other side, we've got technology solution providers. And we need to then sit as a catalyst in the middle of that and be able to translate requirements from industry into solutions that solution providers can deliver on. And likewise, where we've got solution providers, we need to help them shape their propositions so that they can explain that to industry. And by doing that, we will then sort of bring technology providers, industry together and be able to shape requirements, technology solutions, and drive the adoption of drone technology. So the three things that we're going to do, we're going to do the engagement piece. So bringing together industries and drone solution providers. We're going to do the demonstrations where we bring examples of how drones can be used to life. And out of the back of that, develop the toolkit, case studies, and economic benefits. We've got the innovation piece where we've got D-Trig, and we've got the opportunity for people, organizations to participate as a Pathfinder project. And then the other piece we've got is around the public dialogue, where we'll be looking at how we can ensure that public buy into the future adoption of drone technology.
Brilliant, that's really helpful, Chris. So I'll go to our first questions now. So some of these were asked earlier in the first set of presentations, so I'll cover those ones first. So first question from Jeremy Dyack. Please advise what forms of electronic conspicuity solutions are being investigated for drone integration with the wider aviation industry. So I suppose it might be worth talking about the D-Trig and the themes that we've got there. I don't know if Andrew, you want to take a first stab at that?
I think that might be a better question for Chris, to be perfectly honest. I think
okay. Thanks, Andrew. So detect and avoid was a question, yeah?
Yeah, electronic conspicuity and detect and avoid generally, I suppose.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the key themes that we had in D-Trig, the Technology Research and Innovation Grant, one of the key themes there was around onboard detect and avoid. And we're particularly interested, we've seen solutions around ground-based technologies to provide detect and avoid solutions. But I think the challenge with some of the ground-based solutions is, the scale of infrastructure and the cost of that. So in terms of D-Trig, what we've been very specific about is looking for onboard detect and avoid and understand how we can actually build capability that isn't dependent upon ground-based infrastructure and technology. So we're hoping that with that theme, we'll get a number of innovative solutions that will start to address detect and avoid, in ways that are currently not being considered.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Chris. So I've got another question actually for you, Chris. So this is the Chris show right now. Chris talks about engaging with local authorities, but I wonder what work local LGAs and central government are doing to better inform LAs on what they can and cannot do with regard to drone legislation. Each LA takes a different approach, and some bylaws are actually, they have to consider some bylaws.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a really interesting question. We've had numerous discussions about local authorities and kind of how bylaws apply, etc. So I think there are kind of four areas, I think, in terms of local government. So on the Catalyst program, we're working with local government to understand regional priorities. So which industries and sectors where there are potential opportunities within their localized region for drone adoption to make a difference. So that's number one in terms of why we are looking to sort of engage with local authorities and also local enterprise partnerships. I think the second area is around local authorities actually using drones themselves within their organisation. And as you know, David, we're engaged with a couple of local authorities at the moment, looking at how they could adopt drone technology. And I think the interesting thing with local authorities is that they've probably got the broadest range of services of any organisation in the UK, and therefore have the greatest opportunity to adopt drones. I think that then the third area is around actual local authorities' policies for use of drones within their land or on their premises. And I think it's quite interesting there in that local authorities do have very different stances at the moment, ranging from sort of being quite accommodating to drone use to being quite prohibitive. And I think it would be good to get to the point where we've got a sort of standardized approach for where drones can be used across local authorities in terms of using their sites for takeoff and landing, for example. And then I think the final point is as we start to develop more activity in lower level airspace, I personally think that local authorities are going to have a much more involved role in terms of how lower level airspace might be governed, and particularly when we start seeing, the vertiports of the future, how will they be integrated into local planning? So I think local authorities will have a key role in planning that sort of engagement with the public, very similar to the role they have currently for town planning. But I mean, that last one is my personal opinion and and might not be shared by others.
Hi, just an addition to what Chris is talking about there as well. There's a piece of work that the Catapult is going to start actually in the next few weeks, which is actually looking at the design and development of a framework for drone ports, so within cities and elsewhere. So part of that will be an engagement piece with local authorities as well to look at the planning aspects, so we can actually come up with a planning approach for and guidance for local authorities for drone ports. So it's an important part of the work that we're doing this year within the Catalyst and also within the Connected Places Catapult programme of work for future air mobility.
Brilliant, thank you, Andrew. Okay, so I'll just ask another question from the chat now. So this one's probably for Gordon firstly, and then we can get others to contribute as well. So is there a limitation to companies outside of the UK, and how do we participate in drone projects as a drone manufacturer and developer? So I'm assuming these guys are outside of the UK. What other supports BAYS and CPC are providing to companies who want to be involved in the drone ecosystem in the UK, but they are abroad?
Thanks. I don't know if that question is specifically targeting D-Trig, and maybe Chris or others can pick up on the specifics of who's in scope for that. I mean, certainly Innovate UK grants more broadly are accessible from overseas companies. My understanding is, though, you need to show what the benefit to the UK is from that. What activities are going to go on in the UK. I mean, that they're about supporting UK capability, usually in R&D on collaborative activities. But yes, there are an awful lot of international participants to programs, but you need to show that UK capability is my understanding. But I don't run these programs and could find a more specific answer if we need one working with Innovate UK.
Also adding to that, thanks Gordon, is the fact that it's possible to contact us at the Catapult with any questions like that. So we do work with a number of companies, both UK-based companies and those companies looking to invest in the UK, to make those introductions and also to help and advise on how they can develop their business in the UK. So if you contact us at the drones team at Connected Places Catapult, the email address, which I think is at the end of the slide set, we'll be more than happy to speak with you.
Brilliant, thank you guys. So the next question from Peter L, and he says, risk and insurance are complex issues for drones. How does the team think they can be dealt with in live drone flights and changes to physical and radio frequency environments? I'm not sure if who wants to take that one. Does anyone want to give a first stab? I'll nominate someone if not.
I just wanted to say, I know there is a pretty active insurance market for drones, and I think that my understanding is it's going pretty well. Most risks, most projects can get insurance without too much trouble. But that's the insurers telling me that. So I don't know that the real experience of everybody in all different contexts. But it's meant to be a pretty active market. That said, there are certainly challenges ahead, and I think challenges, if there are incidents, dare I say it, that cause people to reassess the risks, I think we could be looking at some challenges there. But I'm not especially close to it. I don't know if anybody else can help with that.
Yeah, I wonder if any of the work we've done on UTM or demonstrations so far with Pathfinder projects has kind of alluded to any insurance or risk challenges or just ways of working.
I think, David, the only thing I would add to what Gordon said is that effectively it's still a pretty immature market, and to effectively quantify risk, is based on data sets. And to get to the point where you can quantify risk, you need a reasonable volume of data. So I suspect, as Gordon's alluded to, at the moment, there is quite a strong insurance market with a number of competitors. I think what we'll see as the volume of drone traffic increases, I think more data will be collected. And I think that will then be used to inform, the risk profiles and risk premiums moving forward. So I think my comment would be very much like Gordon's, established market, immature, but developing, and it will develop based upon the information as the market grows.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Alex B. From Syrium. Says, thank you for the excellent presentations. So thank you very much. I wanted to ask about the output reports and finding from the trials. And he goes on to say, so NASA's UTM program published their ConOps and a wealth of papers, reports and findings. Will the Pathfinder program adopt a similar approach? So above and beyond or the open access UTM papers, or are the findings proprietary to the individual companies?
John.
Chris, yeah.
So the dissemination that we'll be producing out of the UTM piece of work will be a report, which will be a public report, and that will contain a sort of summary of the recommendations that came out of the program. We won't be publishing sort of individual sort of ConOps from each of the operators and from the operator and the UTM providers that were involved in the program separately. But what we did ask is that each participant in the program effectively completed a report that then came to CPC, and we've effectively compiled and consolidated the recommendations, further research areas and learnings, etc., from those reports into the final report.
Brilliant, thank you. So the next question's from an anonymous attendee. So on the local authority competence, do you foresee them being able to govern whether a recreational user can take off in a park? How would this translate to a business that wants to use UAS from their premises?
I'll take that one. So currently our understanding is a number of local authorities are governing whether people can operate, recreational users can use parks for flying drones around. So we understand that's currently in place. What we're hoping to, so that's happening now. And we understand that some cities, towns have blanket coverage for that, so no drones whatsoever in parks. Others do have them for the smaller size systems. So we do. So that is currently happening. So I'm trying to look for the question because it disappeared off the list. So currently that is possible. Obviously, for recreational users, we suggest they operate either on private land or join local flying clubs. That's probably the best place to fly these systems anyway for recreational users. For translating for a business that wants to use drones from their premises, then again, this is from, I suppose it relates to the work that we're going to be doing on the framework for the design and development of drone ports and the use of drones within towns and cities. So within there will be guidance for both businesses and also from a local authority perspective on how that could happen and some of the aspects which you need to take into consideration to make that work. So that'll cover everything from the safety aspects, but also the planning aspects of it as well, the weather, insurance, risk, that type of thing as well.
I was just going to add as well that actually, you know, looking at where you are allowed and aren't allowed to potentially take off and land, I mean, effectively that needs landowner permission to be able to take off and land. And there are a number of solutions that have been developed, you know, so for example, if you look at something like Drone Prep, they are working on an innovative solution at the moment that effectively brings landowners and drone operators together so that drone operators can understand where they could get permission for takeoff and landing from landowners and the kind of requirements to be able to do that. So there are solutions that are starting to come to the market that are facilitating that kind of communication between landowners and operators.
Brilliant, thank you both. Okay, so the next question is from AJ Moda, and the question is, so the DTRIG project places a focus on early stage research, so low TRL projects. What was the thinking behind this, particularly around communications which require national and regional spectrum development? Not sure who wants to take that one, Chris or Andrew?
I'll go with that one. So the thinking behind communication was not necessarily, it wasn't around communication infrastructure, you know, like 4G, 5G, or you know, whatever type of spectrum for sort of infrastructure support. It was really looking at you know, a number of things around redundancy for C2 communications. So effectively, how could you use the communication network infrastructure to provide redundancy for C2? And then we were also looking at opportunities for more, for example, peer-to-peer communication between drones. So effectively enabling drones to collaborate and communicate peer-to-peer if they were flying in close proximity to each other. So it was more those type of requirements that were specified in the DTRIG rather than sort of ground-based infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Nick Bowd from Think Research, and he says, on the community perception angle to UAS, conventional aviation has ICAO standards on the noise certification of aircraft. Are similar standards envisaged for drones? Andrew, anything to add on that? I saw you nodding slightly. I
suppose the quick answer, Nick, is yes. Yes, there is. So a number of drone operators that we're engaged with, drones of all sizes, acknowledge the concerns, potential concerns around the noise implications of the use of drones. So they take that into account now into design. So a lot of designs do look at noise, but we anticipate, and we've already seen some of this take place, is that there will be actually standards developed around noise standards for drones of all sorts of shapes and sizes. So yes, that's already in the thinking for the industry, and we can expect to see that shortly as well.
Thanks, Andrew. So we don't have any more questions in the chat, so please, we've still got a bit more time, so if you've got any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. In the meantime, I've got a question maybe for Chris again. So this one is around something which I think you mentioned very briefly earlier, which is the best practice toolkit that the Pathfinder is going to be developing. It'd probably be good to kind of explain what would be in that and who it's going to be for and who it will help. Sorry, Chris, you're on mute.
Sorry. As we've been sort of starting the engagement process, talking to industry, we started to identify a number of common challenges, and these range from governance through to what your drone strategy might look like and how that might align with the overall organization strategy. Have you got the skills and capabilities in-house to be able to set up a drone service in-house, or do you have the skills and capability to be a sort of intelligent client to be able to procure the right services? There are also then considerations around technology and the regulations. So effectively within the toolkit, we've identified 9 pillars that we believe are sort of fundamental that you would need to consider to establish a drone operation. And the aim of the toolkit, the first piece is effectively an assessment tool so that organizations can understand their strengths and weaknesses against those 9 pillars. And then based upon the priority areas that industry identifies, we will be working through the sort of 9 pillars and expanding the depth of best practice that we give in each of those areas. And I think the key thing here is it's not going to be prescriptive. It's going to be advice and provide options, because there isn't, there's not one right way of doing things. So effectively, the toolkit will be developed incrementally over the 12-month period. And at the end of the 12 months, we'll have something that effectively covers off each of the 9 pillars, helping organizations address any sort of issues, concerns, considerations within that particular pillar.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I don't think we've got any more questions. So do you want to expand on any of the kind of challenges that we've seen so far that we'd feed into that?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting because probably I would say the biggest challenge around drone adoption that we're seeing at the moment is not necessarily around technology or regulations. It's actually about governance and sponsorship within organizations. So what we are seeing is that organizations start to get a good idea about how drones can be used, but sometimes are finding it difficult to sort of escalate that kind of idea and project and get it heard across the organization and sponsored at the appropriate level. Because to take forward a drone project, it needs input from different departments around some of the regulatory aspects, some of the technology aspects. You need subject matter experts. So if you're going to, from within the business, so if you're going to use drones, for example, for asset inspection, you need people on the team who understand what outputs you need from that asset inspection. So I think it's important to make sure that the drone program has the right sort of skills and capabilities. And what we are promoting to try and sort of stop this from being an obstacle and a blocker is effectively to run a small proof of concept or internal pilot, so that effectively organizations can learn how to implement their first example of using a drone, and then build from that, rather than try and sort of go big bang, and try and implement drones for multiple uses across the organization. So pick the one that's going to offer the greatest benefits, and probably the one that's going to be the most straightforward to implement for your organization. Take that forward and then learn from it.
Brilliant. That's really helpful, Chris. And I think there's just a note in the chat from Richard Ryan. So it's not a question, but says the toolkit should reference the new Drone Pilot's legal handbook. So that's not something we've looked at. We should do.
No, so yeah, again, like I said, I know Richard. So he's Richard and somebody else has recently produced a very sort of helpful drone pilot's legal handbook that sort of pulls together a lot of the sort of legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks around drones. So that could be something that we could certainly look at and see how that could fit into part of the toolkit.
Brilliant. So we've got a couple more questions in the meantime there. So the question is from Quentin Browell. Sorry, I think I got your name wrong earlier, Quentin, because I couldn't see the full text. But the question is, how do you see drones fitting into the work of ACOG and the airspace modernization program? Does anybody know about that? Want to take that question?
Yeah, I can take that one. Quentin, thanks for your question. It's a timely one. ACOG are looking or engaging with right across all airspace users, so which includes the drone community as well. So it's already I think it's within their work plan, and we've offered through the Pathfinder program to engage with ACOG so we could provide the viewpoint from the drone industry as well and share some of the findings from the work we're doing, both from the Pathfinders and from the UTM program. So yes, so drones are an important stakeholder in the airspace modernization program, and we should, as an industry, take every opportunity to engage with the ACOG program and to help inform them on our needs and requirements. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And there's a question in the chat for Chris from Adrian. So how and when do you plan to engage with the GA community? He says, as a member of the community, he'd be keen to be involved.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. So we're currently planning the sort of our engagement process at the moment with sort of the aviation sector as a whole and GA. So I noticed, Adrian, that you put your email address in the chat. So we'll reach out to you and let you know that process in more detail and how you can potentially be involved in that. So thanks for that, Adrian.
Brilliant, thank you. So I can see one more question. So it's from Anonymous, and the question is, what is CPC doing to help UK startups? And within the great projects that you've been doing, how are you sharing data so that new small cliques are set up?
Thank you, Anonymous. So within Connected Places Catapult, we have a number of networks, as you'd expect, including an SME network, which SMEs are able to sign up to, and we welcome you to do that, where we can provide help and advice to all SMEs looking to get into this or any other of the sectors that we look after and business areas that we work in within the Catapult itself. As regards sharing data, we can do that through that process or even through attending these sort of events. So we have these events quarterly. So we share as much information as we have from the projects that we have from the main Pathfinder and also from some of the more interesting projects such as you've heard about this morning. We also have, and you can contact through the email address we have if there's a number of questions or if there's specific information you're looking for as a business or a startup. If you can contact us through that, we're more than happy to meet with you, obviously through virtual means at the moment, to discuss that and to share any information that we can have that might be relevant and useful with you. So please just engage with the Catapult either through the Drones team email address, or if you contact us via our website on the SME network, which we can provide a link to if you're interested in that.
Brilliant, thank you, Andrew. And we've got a message in the chat from Elliot Cork. So it's not so much of a question, but I think it's a really interesting point that someone might want to kind of add to or discuss. So I'll just read that out for everyone. So can we as an industry try to encourage end users wanting to implement drone use within their business to start at the end? We see so many who have already brought drones before considering the data they need, and we spend so much time undoing poor purchase decisions, or even worse, trying to shoehorn drones into an inappropriate use. So I think this really resonates with what Chris was saying and what we're finding so far talking to industry, well, people in the industry. you know, they don't necessarily fully understand what their business case is, what the use case is, and have the governance and kind of sponsorship there before they go and buy a drone. And we've heard stories of drones just sitting in cupboards, which is a shame. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
Yeah, I just couldn't agree more really with what's been written by Elliot. And interestingly, we were very deliberate when we put the 9 pillars together. We put technology as the last pillar, because actually it's only until you've been through everything else and you've understood your requirements and how you actually want to use the drone and why you want to use it, that you actually know what technology you need that's going to meet those requirements. So yeah, couldn't agree more. You know, technology comes last, and it's very similar to any other sort of technology-enabled business change program. You know, technology is only one small part of you know, of how you'd go about implementing the program. You know, and if you wanted an accounting system, you won't go and buy an HR system. You know, and it's very similar to drone technology. You know, you need to understand what your requirement.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we've just about come up to time, and I think that's actually probably a pretty good point to end on. Kind of captures a lot of what we've been saying. So I just want to go to the wrap up now. So I think there's a slide.